The forest was alive with fire. Bullets chewed into tree trunks, splinters raining down in sharp bursts. Machine guns clattered from the ridge above, cutting down anyone who dared move in the open. Alvin York pressed himself into the mud, breath ragged, the stench of gunpowder choking his lungs. Around him, men shouted in pain, others called for cover that didn't exist. The squad he had started with was shattered, their leaders dead or wounded. York knew in that moment there was no one left to carry the fight forward but him. Ahead, the German positions kept spitting fire. Behind him, his surviving comrades lay pinned and helpless. The choice was stark. Either he acted, or they all died where they lay. Alvin Cullum. York's journey to that day in October 1918 began far from the battlefields of France. He was born in December 1887 in Pall Mall, a small farming community in the rugged Cumberland Mountains of Tennessee. Life was hard and money was scarce. York's father was a blacksmith and subsistence farmer who raised 11 children on little more than determination and labor. Alvin learned to hunt as soon as he was old enough to carry a rifle. The hills were his school, teaching him patience, precision, and self-reliance. By the time he was a young man, he was known locally as one of the best shots in the valley. Yet York's early years were far from saintly. After his father's death, he fell into heavy drinking and brawling. He became notorious for his temper, often clashing in bar fights in nearby towns. His mother prayed for his salvation, and eventually her prayers were answered. In 1915, York underwent a religious awakening. He joined a small Protestant denomination and swore off violence, alcohol, and gambling. He carried his Bible constantly and devoted himself to living by the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." It was a vow that would haunt him when war called. In 1917, when the United States entered World War I, York was drafted. He filed for conscientious objector status, pleading that his faith forbade him from killing. His request was denied. York wrestled deeply with the decision. Was it God's will that he fight? Could he reconcile killing with his conscience? His officers noticed his conflict and encouraged him to pray for guidance. After days of contemplation and study, York concluded that while killing for revenge or anger was sin, fighting to defend the innocent could be righteous. Reluctantly, he accepted his duty as a soldier. At Camp Gordon, Georgia, York distinguished himself during training. His natural ability with a rifle was unmatched. Officers marveled at his steady aim and composure under pressure. When he shipped out to France in 1918 as part of the 82nd Division, known as the All-Americans, he carried both his Springfield rifle and his quiet faith that God had placed him where he was meant to be. The Meuse-Argonne Offensive was the largest American operation of the war, a brutal push to break the German lines in northeastern France. On October 8th, York's unit, the 328th Infantry Regiment, was ordered to seize German positions near the village of Châtel-Chehéry. The landscape was a tangle of forests, ravines, and fortified machine gun nests. Allied assaults had stalled repeatedly under relentless German fire. That morning, over 100 men from York's battalion advanced into the woods. Within hours, fewer than 20 were still standing. Sergeant Bernard Early led a small detachment of men, including York, on a risky maneuver to flank the German machine guns. They managed to surprise a group of German troops, capturing several dozen prisoners. But before they could move back, hidden machine guns opened up from the ridge. Bullets tore through the air. Early and several sergeants fell dead instantly. The Americans dropped to the ground, pinned in a deadly crossfire. In the chaos, the burden of command suddenly fell to Corporal Alvin York. York pressed into the earth, the sound of machine guns hammering in his ears. He could see his comrades trapped and helpless. He remembered the long hunts back in Tennessee, stalking wild turkeys in the woods, moving silently, waiting for a clear shot. Now, instead of turkeys, it was German gunners mowing down his men. York crawled forward, steady and deliberate, using every bit of cover. Each time a machine gunner raised his head, York's rifle cracked and another fell. He fired with calm precision, working methodically through the nests. The Germans shouted in alarm as one after another was cut down by a man they couldn't see clearly. Several Germans charged with bayonets, hoping to overwhelm him at close range. York dropped his rifle, drew his Colt .45, and shot them one by one as they closed in. Witnesses later described his movements as measured and composed, his accuracy unshaken even under direct attack. For hours he held the position, advancing inch by inch, firing until the machine guns fell silent. When the dust cleared, York and the handful of survivors had forced over 90 Germans to surrender. Still pushing forward, York pressed the advantage, rounding up more prisoners until the final count reached 132. With only a few men at his side, he marched them back through the forest to the astonished American lines. Officers stared in disbelief as York delivered an entire column of enemy soldiers, effectively neutralizing a battalion's worth of resistance almost single-handedly. The impact was immediate. His actions had opened a gap in the German lines, allowing the American advance to continue. For his heroism, York was promoted to sergeant and awarded the Medal of Honor. He also received the Distinguished Service Cross, the French Croix de Guerre, and decorations from other Allied nations. Newspapers back home carried the story, hailing him as the greatest American hero of the war. The humble farmer from Tennessee, who once questioned whether he could fight, had become a legend. Yet York himself was uneasy with the fame. When he returned to Tennessee after the war, crowds and reporters greeted him, but he shied from the spotlight. He turned down offers to profit from his story, refusing to cheapen the memory of the men who hadn't come home. Instead, he married, raised a family, and devoted himself to helping his community. He championed education in rural Tennessee, founding a school to give children the opportunities he never had. For York, the true measure of his service was not medals or parades, but what he could build in peace. Still, the memory of that day in 1918 never left him. He spoke little of it, but when pressed, he explained simply that he had been given no choice, that God had guided his hand to save his comrades. His humility only deepened his legend. In 1941, Hollywood brought his story to the screen in the film Sergeant York, introducing him to new generations. Gary Cooper's portrayal earned an Academy Award, but the real York remained a quiet man in the Tennessee hills, living out his days with the same modesty he had carried into war. Alvin York's stand in the Argonne remains one of the most extraordinary feats of individual courage in American military history. From a poor boy in the mountains, to a reluctant soldier torn by faith, to a man who single-handedly silenced machine guns and captured 132 prisoners, his story embodies the contradictions of war: terror and duty, violence and faith, humility and legend. More than a century later, it continues to resonate, not as myth, but as the lived reality of a man who carried the weight of history in a single day and bore it with quiet grace for the rest of his life. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.